Hello and welcome to episode 5 of Waly Gisnep's Animated Classics. Once again, we are looking at the Walt Disney animated classics in chronological order to ascertain which ones are the creme de la creme and are worthy of going on the list of Waly Gisnep's animated classics. Joining me today is Liam. Liam, what are we looking at today?
Today, Ben, we're going to be having a look at Dumbo, the fourth animated feature released by Disney. To jump straight in, Ben, what are your thoughts on Dumbo?
We all have those Disney films that we watched extensively as a child. Well, not everyone. Everyone who watched Disney films extensively as a child has those films.
No. Everyone.
You might not think you did, but you did. And Dumbo is definitely one of mine. So rewatching it for this, there were so many just little moments, even like Timothy Mouse in the bubbles and things like that, where I was like, oh, this is deeply ingrained into my psyche.
That's really interesting because I'm basically in the opposite boat. I saw it as a child, but for one very particular reason, I would never rewatch it.
Do you want to reveal that reason now, or should we get to it in good time?
We're definitely going to get to it in good time, if you haven't already guessed.
I have a sneaking suspicion, but we'll move on to that. So we get the opening credits. I once again, much like Pinocchio, jotted down my favourite name, which is Art Babbitt, which is very Tolkien-esque. And then we move into the opening, which is a song about storks delivering baby animals. I think this song is needlessly threatening.
As far as openings of films go, it's pretty great though. It does exactly what you need it to do. And threatening song aside, I do think it is a lovely way to start the film. The sequence of all of the different animals having their babies delivered to them is genuinely lovely. And then we counter that with the heartbreaking image of what seems to be the only animal in the circus that is actually looking forward to having a baby, consistently being disappointed.
It's almost existential in how upsetting it is. But coming back to my comments about the Mr. Stork song, which I didn't actually explain, but there are lines in it, and I quote, "He'll get you in the end. It's useless to resist." That is not a fun thing to have in a song about what is about baby animals. And you're right, this film starts on quite a depressing thread and just gets more and more depressing. But rewatching it as an adult, I realised why that is. It's set in Florida, and that explains why everything is horrible.
Don't worry, because eventually the world's worst stork does catch up to Mrs. Jumbo and manages to deliver her new baby elephant.
It's a very short character arc, isn't it? Because within the space of 2 minutes, it's the character doesn't have baby elephant, character wants baby elephant, character gets baby elephant.
The end.
The end, if only. When the stork, voiced by Sterling Holloway, voice of Winnie the Pooh, delivers Jumbo Jr., he spends an inordinate amount of time doing what I can only describe as faffing.
In his defence, he is the only one of the storks to actually talk to the parents he's delivering to.
I guess the storks, much like the human delivery world, are more than happy just to get halfway there and just dump it on the floor.
Wait, is he even supposed to talk then? If he's the only one and he's late, it's making me think he's not great at his job.
But he sings happy birthday and says it's all part of the service. So either there's a separate service that Mrs. Jumbo subscribed to, or he's just woefully out of sync with modern stork practices. He's not embraced the industrial age, is what I'm trying to say.
After Sterling Holloway delivers Jumbo Jr. and sings his song and exits out the window, we meet what I think is arguably the cutest character that Disney have ever created.
It's funny you say that. That was going to be my first comment about Dumbo. I think partly it's because Dumbo's an elephant, and elephants are intrinsically lovable. I think the character design and the animation is incredibly endearing, and I think one of the best choices is not giving Dumbo a voice.
Absolutely. I mentioned in the Fantasia discussion that I am a big fan of non-verbal storytelling. I find they're an excellent creative challenge, because if you can't rely on what the characters are saying, you instead have to show everything with expression and actions.
So I think very highly of Dumbo as a film in general. But I think one aspect of it I'd forgotten about was how well they established that relationship between Dumbo and his mum, because that next sort of 5 minutes is, I think there's one song, but the rest of it is almost dialogue free, and it's just visuals establishing their relationship and how important that is, and it builds that emotional connection, and it's just really cute.
In fact, the only dialogue during this sequence is from the gossiping catty elephants, who have nothing but terrible things to say about Dumbo.
If you don't remember, they are, 5 or 6 other elephants who, they're just dicks. I made a note saying, these are just a bunch of people telling a single mum how to raise their child. They're just the original Mum's Net.
You mentioned that Mrs. Jumbo is a single mum, and they all seem to have a comment about this at the start. When the stork is delivering the baby, they scoff at the very thought of the fact that they might be the ones that are expecting, as if it is, not the done thing or the proper thing. They're very, very proper and pious, these elephants. I will say that I think the elephants are the only characters who I can sort of suspend my disbelief that they don't find Dumbo adorable, because he is one of their species, and if to them he looks like a freak, loaded term, I know, but it's their word, I'm going to go along with it. Every other character in the film should look at Dumbo and go, that's adorable.
He's literally a baby elephant. I don't know what more you want.
I do worry that this discussion will just often come back to how incredibly cute Dumbo is. I have made one note for this film, and the only note is, Dumbo is adorable. And I was like, yep, that's all I need.
I also counted, I think around 50% of the scenes we see Dumbo crying, just to really hammer home how sad this film is.
In my memory, Dumbo was always sad. I've just got this image of this crying elephant with these big sad eyes and its droopy ears. But watching it again, there are a lot of scenes where he's really happy, and it is adorable.
I think that's one of the reasons it's so unrelentingly sad, is Dumbo's just a little baby elephant who wants to do well, and all the scenes of him trying to help his mum put up the circus tent, we'll get to that in a second. All the very cute things where he holds onto his mum's tail, and when he doesn't have his mum, he holds onto Timothy's tail.
Oh, I never noticed that. That's heartbreaking.
I know. It's so sad. And elephants, they really do that. They hold onto tails, which is just adorable. I think this is as good a time to discuss as any. And we get this a lot more in Bambi, but I think this is the first, certainly feature-length Disney film that really focuses on animals. Obviously, in terms of narrative sense, but also you get the feeling that they have really studied how animals move. You get it a lot more in Bambi. The animations of the deer in that are just very realistic. But I think even in this, the way the elephants are drawn is more cartoony, but you can definitely tell the animators have sat down and looked at how these animals move.
I agree. If you look at the elephants overall without focusing on any particular details, the overall effect is that is a cartoon rendition of a very realistic elephant. Unlike the mice, I'll give the mice a pass there, because at least, even though he is anthropomorphized and is wearing clothes, it is recognisably a mouse, as opposed to a little man.
A little green man, a la Jiminy Cricket. The reason the elephants turn on Dumbo is obviously because of his large ears. And as I was watching this film and thinking about the Disney canon, it reminded me of the opening of Hunchback of Notre Dame, and I thought, Dumbo's really lucky he was born in this film, because if he was born in that film, Frollo would be like, this baby's malformed, I'm going to throw it down a well.
I now obviously want to see the version of Hunchback of Notre Dame, which is about Frollo having to raise a baby elephant and keeping it within the confines of Notre Dame Cathedral.
It's a lot more absurdist. All the religious overtones and sexual chemistry would be very different if there was just a baby elephant running around a church.
Well, it wouldn't be a baby elephant by the time the plot happens. That's my point, is eventually this elephant is going to grow up to be a fully sized elephant, because I believe Hunchback of Notre Dame takes place when Quasimodo is... He's at least 16. I seem to remember reading somewhere that he might be 20. So whatever the equivalent of a 20-year-old elephant trapped in the towers of Notre Dame being the bell ringer. And everyone in town knows about it, but they don't talk about it openly. They all know there's an elephant in the towers that does the bell ringing.
The mysterious bell ringer, when you see the silhouette of a full-grown elephant. Who could it be? During the montage that establishes Dumbo and his mum's relationship, there's quite an interesting visual. I don't know if it was deliberate or not, but you see... So a way that a lot of the human characters are done in this film is either via silhouettes or kind of characters don't really have faces. They're kind of amorphous. And you see these humanoid figures that seem to be black characters putting up the circus tents as well as the elephants doing it. And I was thinking, there's some quite interesting visuals here about potentially sort of commenting on the way sort of black people in society were treated at that moment. Obviously, this was before the civil rights movement.
However...
But then it's kind of ruined, yes, by them singing a song about how happy they are.
Yes, so this is probably as good a time as any to bring up that Dumbo is very much a product of its time. Remember, this was made in 1941, I believe. And whilst that doesn't excuse some of the issues that are raised by this film, I do think it is important to consider it compared to depictions and cultures of the time. Because although there is a lot in this film that when you look at it today, your first reaction is just to go, yikes. When you actually look at it compared to a lot of media at the time, there's a lot it does right.
Before we continue, I think it's worth just saying that as two white men speaking in 2020, we are the authority on the civil rights movement in the 1940s. Obviously, that's ironic. It's a weird balance because, obviously, looking back, we'll get to the Crows in a moment. Obviously, that's the big one that people remember. There's a fine line between appropriation and acceptance. As I say, this is a film that features black characters, it features black actors, and musically, you start to notice the influence on it. So a lot of the songs are kind of like working songs. They're those kind of like chants, that sort of almost sort of gospel-y sound. There's definitely some bluesy elements in there, and Pink Elephants is just a jazz number, and that's interesting to see. Now, I don't know whether that's a good thing or not. On the one hand, these depictions do certainly rely on stereotypes, and there's not really any predominant black characters. At the same time, having black actors feature in these films is a big thing, and I think also these depictions do start to become more positive. The other thing I'd say very briefly on this is it is through these acceptances and normalization of seeing and hearing black actors in cinema that you do get that gradual change. The Song of the South, which clearly is not an acceptable film in that it glamorizes slavery, it's great. It's just living in a fun shed. But the actor who played Uncle Remus was the first black actor to win an Oscar, and he won it for that role. So it's a fine line, and I think it's a very complicated thing to unpack.
Specifically regarding the work song, I think you're right that it is the lyrics that push that sequence into the realms of this isn't really acceptable. However, deemed against sort of media of the time, you can definitely see that throughout the film there is that push from the creators to go for inclusion, even if the way they went about it wasn't great and is far from acceptable. You have to admire at least the push for some kind of representation, even just the baby steps.
I think what we can take away from it is the animators were a lot less racist than the songwriters. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, which is the characters of the Crows. Okay, going into this film, what was your perception and memory of them? And having rewatched it what are your thoughts on them?
So, as I said, this isn't a film I've watched a lot in my life, and outside of fond memories of some of the more fun sequences, including the crows, most of my sort of exposure to the crows has been through discussions that people have had as I've grown up, particularly regarding the naming in the script of the lead crow, which, if you're listening and you're not familiar, there are early treatments of the script in which the lead crow is named Jim Crow, which we're going to take away that point from a push for inclusion. I think that's enough to take it away, even if they ended up renaming him to Dandy Crow in all sort of subsequent drafts and all media since.
I don't care if it's a pun, it's a racist pun. And the fact it's a pun doesn't excuse it.
However, watching it again, I think the crows are, next to Dumbo, arguably the highlight of the film.
The first time they speak, and they're all speaking with, I guess the term would be stereotypical accents or voices. They're very much working on sort of stock perceptions of how, in inverted commas, black people talk. After you get over that initial shock, I think they're very likeable characters. As I say, 4 of the 5 of them were voiced by black actors, and whilst they are animals, I think the way they're portrayed is clearly playing off black characterization of the time. There's a certain amount of shock there, but also, as you say, they're probably the most likable characters in the film other than Dumbo and Timothy. They drive the plot forward, and there's an element of outcasts and the idea of these characters are outcasts and they identify with being put in that situation, and there's a certain degree of fraternity there. Again, just to be clear, I'm not saying these characters aren't problematic. They clearly are. But I think in the context of the time, I think they're very positive. And even watching the film now, after I get over that initial shock, I think I like these characters. I think they have the best song in the film, and yeah, like they actually are the only people who make Dumbo happy.
I like that you specify that they're the most likeable characters next to Dumbo and Timothy in this film full of horrible characters who are all consistently mean to Dumbo. That only leaves his mum that they beat. You're right, though. I rate When I See an Elephant Fly as probably the best song Disney produced, arguably for maybe 50 years.
I think it's certainly the best one we've had so far. It's certainly the best up to the 50s, which we can discuss nearer the time, but I don't think there's anything in Bambi that beats it, and it's definitely the best one so far.
Yeah, the whole song is a lot of fun. When I say that the crows are probably the most fun part of the film, I am specifically referring to the song, which, yes, it's bogged down with the problematic caricatures, which are led, as you mentioned, by a white man, doing probably the most severe of the caricatures at that. And I often wonder, when I come across these characters in films, what it must have been like for the actors to be given the brief and saying, can you do a racist Southern stereotype?
I like to think he just very deadpan just said, yes. Yes, I can. For my pathetic fee that they presumably paid actors back then. Interesting piece of information, they originally wanted to cast Louis Armstrong as King Louis in the Jungle Book, but they worried that casting a prominent black musician as an orangutan would be perceived as racist. So they did learn some lessons from this further down the line about casting and the implications that can have.
I have to say that is, whilst I completely agree that was the correct move, it is also a massive shame because there is a version of I Want to Be Like You that would sound incredible.
So, just to reiterate, Mr. Storks dropped Dumbo off, we found out about the big ears, we've put up a circus tent in a new place, and then bringing the guests in. I realise if I'd been alive in the sort of 1910s, 1920s, the job I wanted, which I've seen in multiple films of the era, is the guy who just goes, roll up, come and see literally anything. Because their job brief is stand on a box and shout at people. Then when they're all inside, go home? I don't know. Do you stand outside something else and when they come out you go, you've seen this, now see this? I don't know what the job is, but I want it.
After this, we have Dumbo's first interaction with people. And can't say it enough, the way he approaches this is absolutely adorable. He just sort of trots out, really happy, big smile on his face, and the people just rip him to shreds. Verbally, obviously.
Again, this is similar to the race issue. I don't know whether this is a film that's ahead of its time in terms of calling out animal cruelty, particularly to circuses and how animals were used at the time. Famously, MGM has an actual lion in its credits, which almost certainly wasn't treated well. I don't know whether this is a commentary on that, or whether they were just like, I'll just put this in, it's fine.
I'm going to argue that it is a commentary because the main offender in bullying Dumbo, if you noticed, looks very similar to a character we've encountered before, which is my favourite prick from Pinocchio, Lampwick.
We all know a Lampwick, and he's always a prick. I find this scene unnecessarily distressing. The thought process seems to be, let's make the cutest, most adorable baby elephant possible. Remember, Dumbo's only a few days old at this point. Let's have him forcibly torn away from his mother and her only trying to defend her only child. And because of this, they're both shackled and presumably beaten. In fact, she is beaten on screen. It's horrible.
Yes, so we have Mrs. Jumbo taken away and locked up for being a mad elephant. And because Dumbo has been ostracised by the other elephants, he's just sort of left to fend for himself.
I remember this being a scene where they were like, oh, I don't want to have to look after him. We'll ostracise him because his mum's mad. No. The actual situation is, the poor mum because of this bloody kid. Let's ignore the kid. I was like, are these elephants sociopaths? He can't even eat.
I'd like to revise an earlier point I made. Whilst I'm willing to sympathise that as elephants they are probably the biggest authority on what is an acceptable elephant or not, they go about that in the meanest way possible.
Spoiler warning for the end of this film, I don't like that the elephants seem to get a happy ending, as I don't feel they deserve one.
They don't get a happy ending, though. Those happy smiling faces sticking out the side of the train are just their mounted heads.
That makes a lot more sense. I guess they were like, well, we've got one great elephant, why would we need these rubbish elephants? I guess we're all having elephant burgers for the next 19 months.
As long as you watch this film with that mentality, the ending is much, much happier.
So Timothy Mouse takes in Dumbo and decides that he's going to persuade the ringmaster to let Dumbo be the big main event. The ringmaster's idea for a big event is piling all the elephants on top of one ball. Now, I don't know that needs a finale. Getting one elephant on a ball is insane. Getting one elephant on top of another elephant is insane.
Arguably, the finale is finding a way to get them down.
To be honest, it's a miracle hundreds didn't die during that sequence.
So the sequence in question, Timothy Mouse convinces the ringmaster that Dumbo should launch to the top of the pyramid, waving a little flag. And the sequence in question, and during this act, Dumbo comes out and probably has his most adorable look of the film, which is when Timothy ties his ears up above his head.
And he wants to wave his little flag. He just wants to do the best he can. Jesus.
But obviously, the thing that is holding him down, his ears, come loose. He trips, launches into the ball, and all of the elephants come crashing down, bringing the tent down with them. Everyone is evacuating, and just to finish the scene, we see a little patch of the tent lift up, and Dumbo's little trunk comes out, waving a broken little flag.
What then follows is he's excommunicated from his species. I didn't know that was a thing. And he's made into a clown. And the film does confirm what we've all known. The absolute bottom rung of society is being a clown. I think Timothy Mouse even says, socially, he's washed up.
Well, no, it actually argues that the bottom rung of society is being an elephant for clowns. Because the whole clown act is just torturing Dumbo. They put him on top of a burning building, which, to be fair, kudos for a circus for using that much fire in its act. But they put this...
It's a real fire inside a tent. What could possibly go wrong?
Again, miracle, hundreds didn't die.
Only in Florida.
So they put Dumbo on top of this burning building and then just push him off into, I think, like pie cream, is it supposed to be?
It's not clear, and they also say that the crowd love it and they're going to go and ask for a raise, and I think, God, the people in this film are all psychopaths. The crowd loved it when we beat the shit out of that baby elephant.
And if that isn't bad enough, just as you start processing that every person in this film is a sociopath, the film beats you over the head with probably its biggest emotional stick.
Now, if you watch a lot of films, you'll probably know there's a moment in them where the characters at their lowest point and they're just beaten down and sad and unhappy. In Dumbo, that's the first 40 minutes of the film. But this is very much the absolute kicker. Baby Mine is... I don't even really have anything funny or exciting to say about it. It's just one of the saddest things I've ever seen in a film.
If you're listening to this and you're not familiar, first of all, go and watch Dumbo. I'm not sure how you've got this far and you haven't watched Dumbo. Both of us have got nothing but praise for this film. What Baby Mine is a sequence in which Dumbo visits his mother, trapped in a tiny wagon, stands outside the wagon, and she reaches her trunk down, cradles him, and sings a lullaby. And meanwhile, we're treated to shots throughout the circus of all of the other animals that haven't been torn apart.
And throughout this, literally, his mum, Dumbo, and Timothy are all crying. I mean, it's incredibly effective. John Ronson wrote a book called The Psychopath Test, which is examining this so-called test which looks at psychopathic traits. I feel all you need to do is show someone Baby Mine, and if they don't cry, they are a psychopath.
The whole sequence is fantastic. It is absolutely heartbreaking. And then, in the worst case of emotional whiplash that Disney can ever give you, we move on to the strangest scene they've ever produced.
I forgot how astonishing the animation is in this sequence. Not only do I think it's the best thing they've produced up to this point, I just put it in the best animated sequences full stop. The creativity is amazing, the constant changing visuals. I know it's very much a love or hate sequence. Personally, I adore it. I love how just out there. It's got nothing to do with the film, but it's incredible.
We're talking, of course, about Pink Elephants, a sequence in which both Dumbo, a few-day-old baby elephant, and Timothy Mouse, a mouse, hallucinate a sequence in which terrifying elephant figures just sort of assault all of their senses. You may have guessed, but this is what I'm referring to, where, as a child, I found the film terrifying, and it is entirely because of a 3-minute sequence. Watching it as an adult, I can appreciate it. I think it is really excellent. It's very, very creative. It's a sequence that, without going into too much of a tangent, would be very at home with a lot of animated productions in the 60s, where that sort of more surreal style was a lot more prominent. However, this was in 1941 and is way ahead in terms of creativity, and arguably is still so much better than a lot of the more sort of surreal and psychedelic animations that you found in the 60s itself.
I can understand why, as a child, Liam, you found this sequence creepy and weird, because it objectively is. The bit that I'd forgotten about, which I think is maybe the worst bit...
Is it the elephant made of heads?
I think that's the obvious bit that stands out for people, and the song even goes like, oh, it's scary at this point. No, it's just where a single eye opens in the centre of the screen and stares. It doesn't seem to be an elephant eye. What's that about? Everything else is a pink elephant.
Strangely enough, after the eye, it's all smooth sailing from there. It's just nice images of elephants dancing, and they're often different types of elephants, maybe doing different dances, but there's no body horror going on from that point. It's just lots and lots of pink elephants having a nice time. However, I would argue against the sequence not having anything to do with the film. Narratively, it's an incredibly important feature that we call a cop-out. So the storytellers needed to wrap up the story, and to do so they needed to get Dumbo up into a tree. And their solution was, let's get him drunk, have him hallucinate, and then we don't need to tell the story, which actually works quite well because, as an audience, we don't know why he's in the tree either, even though this is a 70-year-old character that everyone knows can fly.
I do feel this film has a very different attitude towards alcohol when compared to Pinocchio, because Pinocchio, you turn into an ass, right? And then you go down a salt mine or whatever. In this, it's like, hey, drink booze, you might discover you can fly.
Dumbo and Timothy find themselves in a tree with the aforementioned crows. I actually think the sequence in which Dandy Crow is trying to explain to them that they're in a tree without giving the game away is a lot of fun. He's really teasing them, and it leads to the very good reveal of Timothy looking down and realising that he's woken up with a hangover in a tree.
We've all been there.
And that leads to, as I've said, probably the best song, not only in the film, but in the Disney canon for a very long time, followed by the crows trying to murder Dumbo.
I don't think they're trying to murder him, although if that was a pun on murder of crows, well played.
It wasn't. It was a comment on the fact that they don't necessarily know for sure that he can fly. They make up the magic feather, give him the feather, and then start trying to push him off a cliff.
I remembered it as them pushing him off the cliff, but actually they've got him to the top of the cliff, and then he just starts generating the power from his wings. Dumbo doesn't jump until he's ready, is all I'm saying.
If so, they were won over very, very quickly from mocking to going, you know what, I completely believe that this elephant can fly. I want to see it. Talking of seeing an elephant fly, I'm genuinely surprised. I looked this up, and I cannot believe that the scientific community has yet to name a species of fly an elephant fly.
I mean, that's a needless piece of research you've done there, but I'm glad you did.
It just seemed like something in the last 70 years biologists would have done. Because they mention in the song, I've seen a housefly, a horsefly, a dragonfly, but I've never seen an elephant fly. And it surprises me that not a single scientist has thought, when studying this species of insect, let's call this new one we've discovered an elephant fly.
Also, just on that lyric, I've seen a dragonfly. If dragons were real, dragons can fly. That's normal. With his new flight then, Dumbo gets one over on the clowns, he peppers the elephants with peanuts, and since we're approaching the end of the film, I'm just going to go out and say I think Dumbo is a perfect film. I adore it. I put it in my top 5 Disney films. I just think for an hour long, the emotional beats of it, every scene has an emotional impact on you, and I can't say that for anything else that's an hour long. That said, if I could change one thing, it's in this end sequence, all the clowns die a horribly painful death.
Just after they've got their raise too. I have to agree. As I said, it's not a film I have fond childhood memories of, but revisiting it in recent years, every time I've watched it, I've enjoyed it more. It manages to tell a very simple story absolutely perfectly, and I will take a simple story told well any day of the week.
I guess that leads us into talking about a simple story told badly. Liam, do you want to tell us about the recent remake of Dumbo?
So in preparation for this, I've just watched the 2019 quote live action remake of Dumbo.
And you say quote because they couldn't actually get a flying elephant, is that right?
Unfortunately not. And I will say the animation on Dumbo is not bad. The animation on every other animal in the film is terrible. But I have to say, I've heard certain things about this film, so I wasn't going in entirely blind, and I was going in ready to hate it. And I have to say, overall I quite enjoyed it. But that comes with a very, very big caveat. The 2019 film Dumbo is primarily a sequel to Dumbo. However, because they want it to be logically consistent for the world and the story they are telling, they feel the need to retell the story of the original film during the first 40 minutes. And they do it quicker and worse. They take lots of the good stuff out of the story and replace it with human characters, which don't work at all because the filmmakers have no confidence that an audience will be able to follow a story involving a silent, adorable baby elephant.
Despite the fact they're literally making a film on the basis that is true.
This is the thing that annoyed me. As a film overall, and as a sequel to Dumbo, it's all right. As a film titled Dumbo about a flying elephant, doesn't work at all. So to sort of catch you up, I know you've not seen this, Ben, and if you're listening to this and you've not seen the remake of Dumbo, if you want to go in completely blind, I do recommend watching it. I think there's a lot of fun to be had in watching the terrible retelling of the original story. But then after that point, in what is I'm effectively going to call the sequel, things get okay. And what happens is the circus Dumbo is a part of is basically bought by Walt Disney and taken to Disney World. To be clear, it's not Walt Disney. It is a character played by Michael Keaton who is essentially Walt Disney. It's very, very thinly veiled self-critique of the company, which I have a problem with, but Michael Keaton is a lot of fun, and I'm always going to enjoy him playing a slimy businessman. So the last hour and 20 minutes, because this is a 2-hour film, double the length of the original, is Dumbo adjusting to life in Disney World under the thumb of a tyrannical Walt Disney. Is this in any way what you would have expected from a live-action remake of Dumbo?
No. But just because something's unexpected doesn't mean it's good.
It's definitely very messy. I think if you're up for that strange critique of Walt Disney, which I'm fine with, I just don't think the Walt Disney Company is the company to do that critique. You can have a lot of fun, but it's not a very good Dumbo film. The animation on Dumbo is excellent. He is equally as adorable as he was in the animated film, which I was genuinely impressed with. He just looks like a sad baby elephant. Which is that is one criticism, which is in the remake, he perpetually looks sad. He never has sort of moments of happiness and joy where he approaches people only to be disappointed, because they cram that first film into 40 minutes. Well, first of all, it's a Dumbo film, and no elephants show up for the first 10 minutes. Instead, we're just treated to lots of different characters, including most beautiful man in the world, Colin Farrell, who's just come back from the war and is losing an arm. By the way, this is weird. This is what they've decided to go for a remake of Dumbo. It's focusing on an ex-soldier coming back to his circus life and having to adjust to a disability.
Now, I've not seen this film, but for all I know, you're making this up. Because
I mean, it certainly feels as if they were making it up, like, day to day. It is very messy. But as I say, first 10 minutes of that 40-minute retelling of Dumbo, we don't see an elephant. 5 minutes after we've seen an elephant, he's basically separated from his mother and just looks sad for the rest of the film.
And part of me was thinking, oh, that's happier. No. One of the reasons the original Dumbo is so sad is because you see him try and be happy and then people crush his dreams. That's sadder than someone who was already sad.
So, on the whole, it's not great. However, I admire it within the remakes because, first of all, it has a new, different script, which some of these remakes they're making can't even claim that. One big criticism I do have of it is there are a lot of elements that are references to the original film that do not make sense if you have not seen the original film. So it is only made for a sort of nostalgic audience that wants to be reminded of the film Dumbo, in which case just rewatch Dumbo. So one quick example is when we're introduced to the elephant, she's a pregnant elephant and is going to be having a baby any day now. So they cut the stalks because it's set in the real world. And during the night, she looks out of her window and a stork is on one of the other carriages and then flies away. And that's supposed to tell us that she's given birth. But that only works if you've seen the original and are like, oh yeah, the stork delivers Dumbo. Because I know there is the mythology of storks delivering babies, but a 3-second clip of a stork on another carriage isn't really supposed to tell us that she is currently giving birth, particularly when she's at the window looking out. It's very messy and it's full of knowing nods that only make sense if you've seen the original, in which case, why are you watching this?
But that's the whole point of these remakes is, hey, you like this film? Don't go and rewatch it. Rewatch this film that we've made. It's basically the same but kind of worse and has CGI that's probably going to date badly.
So it's generally quite messy, though I was surprised by it. I think as far as the remakes go, it's probably the one that has the most merit because it is effectively a sequel that they've shoehorned in a remake at the beginning. And I'll almost forgive the rushed and messy remake in the first 40 minutes because it's them trying to set up their sequel.
With that covered then, is there anything else we need to talk about regarding the Dumbo film?
There's only one last thing, and it's not something I'm particularly looking forward to for this film, which is we need to decide which character in Dumbo is objectively the sexiest character.
Okay, so I came into this one quite enthusiastic because I was thinking you've got a lot of realistically drawn animals, a lot of which don't really have personalities. Every other character, with a couple of exceptions, is just horrible, or as discussed, is just sort of an amorphous blob. But then I realised there's one character who, despite being a terrible human being, they do have a whip. And also, they're the kind of person who nonchalantly gets naked mid-conversation, and that's the ringmaster.
The ringmaster with his oddly translucent clothes.
Yes, so, yeah, I forgot about that. There's a scene where he's getting undressed in silhouette, which is pretty sexy, whilst talking to, I think it's caretaker, the janitor, and he's just saying, hey, here's what I'm going to do. And he's very clearly naked. Not that you can tell by the silhouette, obviously. Whip, nonchalant nakedness, I'm going ringmaster.
I hadn't considered the ringmaster. My first instinct actually took me to Dandy Crow himself. I think he's got a lot of swagger about him, but the constantly being reminded that this is a white actor doing a horrifically stereotypical performance is just going to take me out of that. So I'm actually going to go for the clown dressed as the elephant mother.
I was honestly expecting belly dancing elephant before any of the clowns,
Completely
but fair play. No, you can't take it back. You went for horrible elephant clown woman man.
So there you have it. The sexiest characters in Disney's Dumbo are the whip-wielding ringmaster and the clown dressed as an elephant woman.
So we've answered the second most important question about Dumbo, but we now need to answer the most important. Is Dumbo worthy of going on the list of Waly Gisnep's animated classics?
I've got the parchment here, I've rolled out a ceremonial red carpet, and yeah, I'm going to put it on.
I wholeheartedly approve of this gesture. If it wasn't obvious from how much I've gushed about it for the last 40 minutes, not only do I think Dumbo is probably one of the top 5 Disney films, I'd pretty much call it a perfect film. There's some problematic stuff in there, but the overall package and the impact it has can't be understated. For me, it's worthy of going on there, no shadow of a doubt.
There really isn't any other film quite like Dumbo, and I think for that reason, and because it is so unique and achieves what it sets out to do so brilliantly, it's got to go on the list.
And that makes Dumbo number 2 on there?
It is indeed. Dumbo takes its place under Pinocchio. Unfortunately, we went a bit John Hancock with our Pinocchio, so we'll squish in Dumbo just underneath to save some room. And with that, we conclude our discussion of Dumbo. Ben, what are we looking at next time?
Next time, we are looking at notorious tearjerker Bambi, the last feature-length film we're going to be looking at for quite some time. I can't remember a lot about it, so it's going to be fun to rewatch it.
Yeah, Bambi is one I never saw growing up, and I'm still not overly familiar with it, so I'm looking forward to revisiting this one and seeing how I feel.
As always, let us know whether you agree or more likely disagree with our opinions, and we'll see you next time for Waly Gisnep's Animated Classics.